The hospital ship Solace floated silently in the vast emptiness of space. Its white, smooth surface reflected the faint glow of a distant star. Inside, the hum of machinery and soft footsteps filled the air. This was no ordinary vessel. It was a place of healing, a sanctuary for those injured in battles far away from Earth. The crew worked tirelessly to save lives, their faces etched with determination. Dr. Laura Bennett moved quickly through the medical bay, her hands steady as she performed surgery on a soldier wounded in a recent skirmish. Her blonde hair was tied back tightly, and her blue scrubs were stained with blood. She didn't look up as Daniel Carter handed her tools one by one. Daniel was young, barely out of training, but he had proven himself reliable under pressure. His dark eyes darted around the room, alert for anything that might go wrong. "You're doing great," Laura said, glancing briefly at him. "Just keep the instruments ready." "Yes, Doctor," Daniel replied, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. He knew better than to ask questions during critical moments like this. Instead, he focused on staying 2 steps ahead, anticipating what Laura might need next. Elsewhere on the ship, Captain Robert Hayes stood on the bridge, staring at the monitors that displayed endless fields of stars. His tall frame loomed over. The control panels and his sharp features betrayed a deep concern. Something about this mission felt off. The Solace wasn't armed. It relied entirely on its status as a neutral vessel protected by intergalactic law. But being so close to enemy territory made him uneasy. "Captain," called Lieutenant Sarah Myers, the communications officer. Her brown hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her uniform was immaculate. "We've passed the jump point. We should be clear of any hostile zones now." Hayes nodded but didn't relax. "Stay vigilant, Lieutenant. We're still too close. To the border for my liking." Sarah gave a curt nod and returned to her station. The rest of the bridge crew exchanged glances, sensing their captain's unease. They all hoped this trip would end without incident, but experience had taught them not to take anything for granted. Down in the mess hall, Emily Dawson sat across from Ryan Scott, sipping synthetic coffee that tasted more like burnt plastic than anything else. Emily was petite, with curly red hair and freckles scattered across her nose. She laughed at something Ryan had just said, trying to lighten the mood. Ryan, with his broad shoulders and easygoing smile, leaned back in his chair. "You really think old Earth movies are better than modern ones?" Emily teased, raising an eyebrow. "Absolutely," Ryan replied, grinning. "They had heart. And explosions. What more do you need?" Emily rolled her eyes playfully. "Well, I suppose we won't find out anytime soon, not with all this tension hanging over us." Ryan's smile faded slightly. "Yeah, I know what you mean. Feels like everyone's waiting for something bad to happen." Before either could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Cups and trays clattered to the floor as alarms blared throughout the corridors. Red warning lights flashed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Panic erupted instantly. "What's going on?" Emily shouted, grabbing onto the edge of the table, to steady herself. "I don't know," Ryan yelled back, already on his feet. "Come on, we need to get to engineering." On the bridge, Captain Hayes barked orders, his voice cutting through the noise. "Report. What's happening?" Sarah frantically tapped at her console. "Multiple contacts approaching fast. They're not responding to hails." "Battle stations," Hayes commanded. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." But it was too late. The attackers opened fire without warning, their weapons tearing into the fragile hull of the Solace. Explosions rocked the ship, sending debris flying and knocking people off their feet. Smoke filled the air, and the smell of burning metal choked anyone who dared breathe too deeply. Laura and Daniel barely had time to react. The operating table shook violently, forcing Laura to abandon her patient mid-surgery. "Stabilize him," she ordered Daniel, pointing at the unconscious soldier. "I'll help evacuate the others." Daniel nodded, his face pale but resolute. He grabbed a portable oxygen tank and rushed to the soldier's side, stabilizing him as best he could. Meanwhile, Laura sprinted toward the main ward, shouting instructions to the nurses and orderlies. "Get the patients to the secure compartments," she yelled. "Move, move, move!" In the mess hall, Emily and Ryan struggled to stay upright as another blast hit the ship. "Engineering deck!" Ryan shouted, pulling Emily along. "We have to help Harper." Chief Engineer William Harper, was already hard at work when they arrived, sweat pouring down his face as he tried to contain the damage. Sparks flew from damaged consoles and the acrid smell of smoke stung their nostrils. "We're losing power to life support," Harper growled, slamming his fist against a malfunctioning panel. "Get those auxiliary systems online or we're all dead." Emily and Ryan sprang into action, working together to reroute power. Their hands moved quickly, fingers flying over keyboards as they fought to stabilize the ship's systems. Time seemed to slow as every second stretched into eternity. Back. On the bridge, Captain Hayes clenched his fists as he watched the enemy ships circle like predators. Their markings were unfamiliar, nothing like the symbols used by known factions. "Who are they?" he muttered under his breath, frustration boiling inside him. Sarah continued to try reaching the attackers, but all she got was static. "No. Response, Captain. They're ignoring us completely." Hayes gritted his teeth. The Solace wasn't built for combat. It was a hospital ship, meant to heal, not fight. Yet here they were, caught in the crossfire of an unprovoked attack. He scanned the monitors, searching for any sign of hope. Then, finally, a transmission came through. "This is Admiral Lucas Grant of the Earth Defense Fleet. We've received your distress signal. Hold tight. We're en route." Relief washed over Hayes's face, though he knew reinforcements were still hours away. For now, survival depended entirely on the courage and resourcefulness of his crew. Throughout the ship, fear mingled with determination. Nurses carried stretchers, engineers patched leaks, and soldiers helped wherever they could. Despite the odds stacked against them, no one gave up. They were united by a single purpose: to survive. As the battle raged on outside, the crew of the Solace fought just as fiercely within. Each person played their part, knowing that failure meant certain death. And though the outcome remained uncertain, one thing was clear: they wouldn't go down without a fight. The Solace groaned under the relentless assault. Explosions echoed through its corridors, shaking the ship like a leaf in a storm. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to see or breathe. The once calm and orderly vessel had turned into a chaotic battlefield, with every crew member fighting not just for their lives, but for the survival of the wounded they were sworn to protect. Dr. Laura Bennett moved quickly through the medical bay, her white coat now stained with soot and blood. She shouted instructions to the nurses and orderlies, her voice cutting through the noise. "Get the patients to the secure compartments. Prioritize the critical cases." Her blue eyes darted around the room, assessing the situation with sharp precision. Daniel Carter stayed close to her side, his hands trembling slightly as he helped carry stretchers. He was still new to this kind of pressure, but he refused to let fear paralyze him. "Doctor, what about the ones in surgery?" he asked, pointing to the operating table where a soldier lay unconscious. "We'll have to stabilize them here," Laura replied firmly. "We can't move them yet. Grab the portable oxygen tanks and make sure everyone has masks on." Daniel nodded and rushed to obey. His mind raced as he worked, trying to keep up with the chaos around him. The wall shook again, and a piece of the ceiling collapsed nearby, narrowly missing a group of nurses. Daniel flinched but didn't stop moving. There was no time to panic. In the mess hall, Emily Dawson and Ryan Scott fought to stay upright as the ship shuddered violently. They clung to each other for balance, their faces pale but determined. "Engineering deck," Ryan shouted over the noise. "We need to help Harper." Emily nodded, gripping Ryan's arm tightly as they stumbled toward the nearest exit. The corridor ahead was dark, lit only by flickering emergency lights. Sparks flew from damaged panels and the smell of burning metal made their eyes water. Despite the danger, they pressed forward, knowing that every second counted. When they reached the engineering deck, Chief Engineer William Harper was already deep in the fight. His face was streaked with grease, and his shirt clung to him with sweat. He cursed under his breath as he slammed his fist against a malfunctioning console. Sparks flew and the panel sparked angrily. "We're losing power to life support," Harper growled, his voice hoarse. "If we don't fix this soon, we're all dead." "What do you need us to do?" Ryan asked, stepping forward. Harper glanced at him, then at Emily. "You two, reroute auxiliary power to the life support systems. Use whatever you can find. We're running out of options." Without hesitation, Emily and Ryan sprang into action. They knelt beside a tangle of wires and began working together, their hands moving quickly despite the chaos around them. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she connected circuits, while Ryan held a flashlight steady, illuminating their work. The sound of explosions overhead reminded them how little time they had. On the bridge, Captain Robert Hayes stood firm, his jaw clenched as he watched the monitors. Enemy ships swarmed around the Solace, firing relentlessly. The attackers showed no mercy, their weapons tearing into the fragile hull of the hospital ship. Hayes' heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Status report," he barked, his voice cutting through the tension. Lieutenant Sarah Myers typed furiously at her console. "Shields are down to 15%, Captain. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 5. Life support is failing in multiple sections." Hayes gritted his teeth. The Solace wasn't built for combat. It was a hospital ship meant to heal, not fight. Yet here they were, caught in the crossfire of an unprovoked attack. He scanned the monitors, searching for any sign of hope. Then, finally, a transmission came through. "This is Admiral Lucas Grant of the Earth Defense Fleet. We've received your distress signal. Hold tight. We're en route." Relief washed over Hayes' face, though he knew reinforcements were still hours away. For now, survival depended entirely on the courage and resourcefulness of his crew. "Lieutenant, send a message back to Admiral Grant," Hayes ordered. "Tell him we're holding on, but won't last much longer without assistance." Sarah nodded and began typing the response. Her hands shook slightly, but she focused on her task, knowing how crucial communication was at a time like this. Throughout the ship, the crew fought with everything they had. Nurses carried stretchers, engineers patched leaks, and soldiers helped wherever they could. In one of the secure compartments, Dr. Laura Bennett worked tirelessly to stabilize the most critical patients. She ignored the sweat dripping down her face and the smoke stinging her eyes, focusing solely on saving lives. "Hang in there," she whispered to a young soldier lying on a stretcher. His breathing was shallow, and his face was pale, but he managed a weak smile. "You're doing great, Doctor," Daniel said, handing her another tool. His voice wavered slightly, but he kept his composure. He knew that showing fear would only make things worse. Laura nodded briefly, her attention never leaving her patient. She adjusted the oxygen mask and continued her work, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. Meanwhile, Emily and Ryan finally succeeded in rerouting power to the life support systems. The hum of machinery returned, and the air grew slightly fresher. Harper let out a sigh of relief, though his expression remained grim. "Good job," he said gruffly, patting Ryan on the shoulder. "But we're not out of the woods yet. Keep an eye on those systems, they're barely holding together." "Yes, sir," Emily replied, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to stand, tall. There was still so much to do. As the battle raged on outside, the crew of the Solace refused to give up. Each person played their part, knowing that failure meant certain death. Soldiers barricaded damaged sections of the ship to prevent further breaches, while medics tended to the wounded with whatever supplies they could salvage. Even the cooks pitched in, using their knowledge of equipment to help repair broken machines. Despite the odds stacked against them, a sense of unity emerged among the crew. Strangers became allies, working side by side to keep the ship and each other alive. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was tempered by determination and grit. Back on the bridge, Captain Hayes stared at the monitors, his mind racing. The enemy ships were relentless, their attacks growing more aggressive by the minute. But something about their tactics seemed strange. They weren't targeting specific areas of the ship. Instead, they fired randomly, as if trying to cause maximum damage without discrimination. Who are these people? Hayes muttered under his breath, frustration boiling inside him. Why attack a hospital ship? Sarah continued to monitor communications, hoping for some clue about the attacker's identity. So far, all attempts to contact them had failed. Whoever they were, they clearly had no interest in negotiation. "Captain," Sarah called suddenly, her voice tense. "I'm picking up faint signals from one of the enemy ships. It's fragmented, but I think I can decode it." "Do it," Hayes ordered immediately. "We need answers." Sarah worked quickly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. After several tense minutes, she looked up, her expression grim. "Captain, the language, it's not human. At least not anything in our database." Hayes frowned deeply. "Not human? Are you sure?" "I'm positive," Sarah replied. "It's unlike anything we've encountered before." The realization sent a chill through the bridge. If the attackers weren't human, then who or what were they? And why had they chosen the Solace as their target? Before anyone could speculate further, another explosion rocked the ship. Alarms blared louder than ever, and the lights flickered dangerously. Hayes clenched his fists, knowing they were running out of time. "Everyone, hold on." He shouted into the intercom, "Help is coming, but we need to survive until then. Stay strong." His words echoed through the ship, reaching every corner of the Solace. Though battered and bruised, the crew found strength in their captains, resolve. They tightened their grip on tools, weapons, and hope, vowing to fight until the very end. Outside, the enemy ships circled closer, their weapons glowing ominously. The Solace was battered and scarred, its once pristine hull now a patchwork of dents and scorch marks. Yet within its walls, humanity burned brightly, a stubborn flame refusing to be extinguished. For now, survival was their only goal. But even as they clung to life, one question lingered in everyone's mind. Who or what was behind this merciless attack? And what did they want? The battle outside the Solace raged on, but inside, the crew fought just as hard to keep the ship and themselves alive. Every second felt like an eternity, and the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone. The attackers showed no signs of stopping, their relentless assault tearing into the fragile hull of the hospital ship. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, smoke filled the air, and alarms blared continuously, creating a cacophony of chaos. Dr. Laura Bennett worked tirelessly, in one of the secure compartments, her hands moving quickly as she treated the wounded. Her face was streaked with sweat and soot, but she didn't pause for even a moment. Around her, nurses and orderlies rushed back and forth carrying stretchers and supplies. The room was cramped, and the smell of blood and smoke made it hard to breathe, but no one complained. They all knew that giving up wasn't an option. "Doctor, we're running low on bandages," Daniel Carter said, his voice trembling slightly. He held up a nearly empty box, his knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. "Use whatever you can find," Laura replied without looking up. "Cloth, blankets, anything. Just make sure the bleeding stops." Daniel nodded and hurried off, his mind racing. He rummaged through nearby storage bins, pulling out anything that might work. His hands shook as he tore strips of fabric from old uniforms, but he forced himself to focus. Lives depended on him, and he couldn't afford to falter. In the engineering deck, Emily Dawson and Ryan Scott worked side by side, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of emergency lights. Chief Engineer William Harper stood nearby, barking orders and checking systems. The life support had stabilized for now, but the rest of the ship was still falling apart. "We need to seal that breach on Deck 5, Harper said, pointing to a flashing red alert on his console. "If we don't, the entire section will decompress." "I'll go," Ryan volunteered immediately. He grabbed a welding torch and a patch kit, already heading toward the door. "I'm coming with you," Emily said firmly, grabbing a helmet and following him. She wasn't about to let him face the danger alone. The corridor leading to Deck 5 was dark and filled with debris. Smoke hung thick in the air, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Ryan moved cautiously, shining a flashlight, around corners to check for hazards. Emily stayed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. When they reached the breach, the sight was worse than they'd expected. A jagged hole gaped in the wall, exposing the interior of the ship to the cold vacuum of space. Loose wires sparked dangerously, and pieces of metal jutted out like broken teeth. Ryan wasted no time, setting to work on sealing the gap with the patch kit. Emily held the flashlight steady, her hands trembling slightly as she watched him. "Hurry," she whispered, glancing nervously at the exposed opening. "I don't want to get sucked out." Ryan didn't respond. He was too focused on his task. His hands moved quickly, securing the patch in place and welding it shut. The sound of hissing air faded as the seal took hold, and Emily let out a shaky breath of relief. "Good job," she said softly, patting him on the shoulder. "Let's get back before something else happens." On the bridge, Captain Robert Hayes stared at the monitors, his expression grim. The enemy ships continued their relentless assault, firing without mercy. The Solace's shields were almost gone, and the hull was barely holding together. Hayes clenched his fists, his mind racing for a solution. "Lieutenant Myers, have we heard anything from Admiral Grant?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. Sarah Myers typed furiously at her console, her eyes scanning the incoming data. "Admiral Grant confirms they're en route, Captain. ETA is 45 minutes. 45 minutes? Hayes muttered under his breath. "We might not last that long." "We'll hold on, sir," Sarah said firmly, though her voice wavered. Slightly. "We have to." Hayes nodded, forcing himself to stay calm. He turned to the communications officer stationed beside Sarah. "Keep trying to contact the attackers. Maybe they'll respond this time." "Yes, Captain," the officer replied, adjusting his headset and sending another hail. Static crackled over the speakers, offering no answers. Back in the medical bay, Laura finished stabilizing a young soldier and stepped back, wiping her hands on her coat. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but there was no time to rest. Another stretcher arrived, carrying a patient who needed immediate attention. "Doctor, how are you holding up?" Daniel asked, noticing the strain on her face. "I'm fine," Laura replied curtly, though her voice betrayed her fatigue. "Just keep the supplies coming." Daniel nodded and hurried off, determined to help however he could. He passed by a group of soldiers who were helping barricade a damaged section of the ship. Their faces were smeared with dirt and blood, but their expressions were resolute. Despite the overwhelming odds, they refused to give up. Meanwhile, Emily and Ryan returned to the engineering deck, where Harper greeted them with a nod of approval. "Good work," he said gruffly. "Now let's see if we can get some power back to the engines." The trio huddled around a console, studying the readouts carefully. The main engines were offline, leaving the Solace drifting helplessly in space. If they could restore even partial functionality, they might be able to maneuver away from the worst of the attack. "I think I can reroute some auxiliary power," Emily said, pointing to a set of circuits. "It's risky, but it might buy us some time." "Do it," Harper ordered. "We don't have much choice." Emily got to work, her hands steady despite the tension in the air. Ryan kept an eye on the monitors, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. After several tense minutes, the engines roared to life, albeit weakly. The ship lurched forward, slowly pulling away from the center of the assault. "We did it," Ryan exclaimed, relief flooding his face. "Don't celebrate yet," Harper warned. "This won't last long. We've only bought ourselves a little breathing room." Even so, the small victory gave the crew a much-needed boost. Word spread quickly through the ship, lifting spirits and renewing determination. They weren't out of danger, but every step forward mattered. Outside, the enemy ships adjusted their positions, clearly frustrated by the Solace's sudden movement. Their weapons fired again, but the distance gave the crew a slight advantage. Shields flickered but held, for now. On the bridge, Captain Hayes allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. "Good work, everyone," he said, addressing the crew. "Stay sharp. Help is almost here." His words echoed through the intercom, reaching every corner of the ship. In the medical bay, Laura paused for a moment, letting the encouragement sink in. Nearby, Daniel smiled faintly, feeling a renewed sense of hope. In the mess hall, soldiers and engineers gathered around makeshift tables, sharing food and water rations. Conversations were quiet, but filled with resolve. They talked about home, about Earth, and about the lives they wanted to return to. For a brief moment, the fear and chaos faded, replaced by camaraderie and purpose. As the minutes ticked by, the tension grew thicker. Everyone knew that Admiral Grant's fleet was their only chance of survival. The Solace couldn't withstand much more punishment, and the attackers showed no signs of relenting. Finally, a new transmission came through. "This is Admiral Lucas Grant. We're entering the sector now. Prepare for extraction." Cheers erupted throughout the ship, mingling with tears of relief. On the bridge, Captain Hayes let out a deep breath, his body sagging with exhaustion. "Thank you, Admiral," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a sight for sore eyes." "Hold your position," Grant replied. "We'll take care of the rest." Moments later, Earth's warships emerged from hyperspace, their sleek forms cutting through the void like avenging angels. Cruisers and destroyers unleashed, a barrage of missiles and plasma cannons driving the attackers back. Fighter squadrons swarmed the enemy ships, forcing them to retreat. The crew of the Solace watched in awe as their rescuers turned the tide of the battle. Explosions lit up the darkness, and the once overwhelming threat began to crumble. Cheers erupted again, louder this time as hope surged through the battered vessel. Captain Hayes stepped onto the intercom one final time. "Everyone, this is it, we're safe. Admiral Grant has arrived. Let's finish what we started and prepare for extraction." His words brought a sense of closure to the chaos. Medics tended to the last of the wounded, engineers secured critical systems, and soldiers ensured the ship was ready for evacuation. Though battered and bruised, the Solace had survived. As rescue shuttles docked and reinforcements poured aboard, the crew finally allowed themselves to relax. Exhaustion washed over them, but so did pride. They had faced unimaginable odds and come out alive, not because they were invincible, but because they had stood together. For now, the nightmare was over. But as they looked out at the stars, they couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Solace was safe, but the scars of battle were everywhere. The once pristine hospital ship now looked like a battered relic, its white hull scorched and dented. Inside, the crew worked tirelessly to clean up the mess and tend to the wounded. The air still smelled of smoke and burned metal, but there was a sense of relief that hadn't been there before. Admiral Lucas Grant's fleet had driven off the attackers, and now rescue shuttles ferried supplies, engineers, and medics aboard to help stabilize the situation. Dr. Laura Bennett sat on a makeshift stool in one of the secure compartments, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped water from a canteen. Her blue scrubs were stained with blood and soot, and her blonde hair had long since escaped its tie, falling around her face in messy waves. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to rest, even if it was just for a moment. "Doctor, are you okay?" Daniel Carter asked, his voice soft but concerned. He stood nearby holding a clipboard with notes about the patients they had treated. "I'm fine," Laura replied, forcing a small smile. "Just tired. We all are." Daniel nodded, understanding. He glanced around the room, taking in the sight of nurses tending to the injured and orderlies organizing supplies. The chaos had settled into a quieter kind of exhaustion, but everyone was still working hard. "We did good today," he said after a pause. "You saved so many lives." Laura shook her head, her expression serious. "We lost too many, Daniel. Too many brave people who didn't deserve this." Her words hung heavy in the air, but Daniel didn't argue. He knew she was right. Despite their efforts, not everyone had made it. Bodies lay covered in sheets waiting to be identified and honored. It was a grim reminder of the cost of war, or whatever this attack had been. In the engineering deck, Emily Dawson and Ryan Scott helped Chief Engineer William Harper inspect the damage. The auxiliary power they had managed to restore earlier was barely keeping the ship running, and repairs would take days, if not weeks, to complete fully. Harper moved slowly, his face pale with fatigue, but his focus never wavered. "You two did great out there," Harper said, nodding toward Emily and Ryan. "If you hadn't sealed that breach, we'd have lost more than just air." "Thank you, sir," Emily replied, though her voice was quiet. She leaned against a console, her red curls damp with sweat. Her legs felt weak, and her mind kept replaying the moments when she thought they might not make it. But they had, and that mattered. Ryan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We got lucky," he said, "and we had each other." Harper grunted in agreement. "Luck only gets you so far." Now let's see what else needs fixing. On the bridge, Captain Robert Hayes stood beside Admiral Lucas Grant, watching as engineers from the fleet began stabilizing the Solace's systems. The Admiral was a tall man with sharp features and gray hair, his uniform crisp despite the chaos around him. His presence brought a sense of authority that helped calm the remaining tension among the crew. "Captain Hayes," Grant said, turning to face him, "you and your crew performed admirably under impossible conditions. I've already sent word back to Earth. Your actions will not go unrecognized." Hayes nodded, though his expression remained somber. "Thank you, Admiral. But recognition doesn't bring back the ones we lost." Grant sighed heavily, his gaze shifting to the monitors displaying the damaged sections of the ship. "No, it doesn't, and that's something we'll carry with us. But for now, focus on recovery. Let us take care of the rest." Hayes appreciated the sentiment, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The attack had come without warning, and the enemy's motives were still unclear. Who or what had targeted the Solace, and why? Admiral Grant seemed to sense his thoughts. "We're analyzing everything we can find," he said. "Those ships weren't human, but we don't know much beyond that yet. Intelligence teams are already working on it." Hayes clenched his fists briefly before relaxing them. "They attacked a hospital ship, Admiral, a neutral vessel. That's a violation of every rule we've ever agreed upon." "I know," Grant replied, his tone firm. "And whoever they are, they'll answer for it. Humanity won't tolerate such aggression." As the conversation ended, Hayes turned his attention back to the crew. They had endured unimaginable hardship, but their resilience had kept the Solace alive. He stepped onto the intercom, addressing everyone aboard the ship. "To the crew of the Solace," he began, his voice steady and strong. "Today we faced an enemy unlike any we've encountered before. They struck without mercy, targeting those who could not fight back. Yet through sheer determination and courage, you held the line. You saved lives, protected the wounded, and refused to give up. I am proud to call you my crew, and I know Earth is proud of you too." His words echoed through the corridors, reaching every corner of the ship. In the medical bay, Laura paused her work to listen, tears welling in her eyes. Nearby, Daniel straightened, his chest swelling with pride. Even Harper, deep in the engineering deck, stopped what he was doing to hear the captain's message. "We've been through hell," Hayes continued. "But we're still here. Thanks to Admiral Grant and his fleet, we're safe. Now let's focus on healing. Not just our ship, but ourselves. Together we'll get through this." When the transmission ended, silence fell over the Solace. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one filled with reflection. Each person aboard the ship had played a part in their survival, and now they could finally begin to process everything they had been through. Back on Earth, news of the attack spread quickly. Public outrage fueled demands for increased military presence along the borders, and politicians debated strategies to prevent future incidents. Scientists worked around the clock to study the data collected from the enemy ships, hoping to uncover clues about their origins and intentions. Meanwhile, media outlets broadcast images of the damaged Solace, highlighting the bravery of its crew and the sacrifices they had made. For Laura, returning home felt bittersweet. She walked through the corridors of the ship one last time before disembarking, her footsteps slow and deliberate. She stopped at the memorial wall, where names of the fallen had been engraved. Tears streamed down her face as she traced the letters of a young soldier she had tried and failed to save. "We'll remember you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All of you." Daniel joined her a moment later, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "They wouldn't want us to stop," he said softly. "They'd want us to keep going." "For them." Laura nodded, wiping her eyes. "You're right. We owe them that much." As the Solace prepared for its next voyage, repairs underway and crew rested, humanity resolved to stand stronger than ever. The attack had shaken them, but it had also reminded them of their resilience. Whether facing known enemies or unknown threats, they would not back down. Captain Hayes stood by a viewport gazing at the stars. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, vast and mysterious. Somewhere out there, danger lurked. But so did hope. And as long as humanity refused to surrender, that hope would guide them forward. "We'll keep going," Hayes muttered to himself, his voice firm. "Because that's who we are." The Solace limped through space, escorted by Admiral Grant's fleet. Its engines sputtered weakly, and its once pristine exterior was now a patchwork of scorch marks and welded patches. Inside, the mood was somber, but resolute. The crew had survived the attack, but the aftermath weighed heavily on them. They were safe for now, but questions lingered in their minds. Who or what had attacked them? And why? Dr. Laura Bennett sat in the medical bay, staring at her hands. They were clean now, scrubbed free of blood and dirt. But she could still feel the weight of every life she had tried to save, and every life she hadn't been able to. Her mind replayed moments from the battle, the sound of alarms, the smell of smoke, the desperate cries of wounded soldiers. She shook her head, trying to clear it, but the memories wouldn't fade. "Doctor?" Daniel Carter's voice broke through her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, holding a clipboard. His face was pale and his dark eyes looked tired. But he managed a small smile. "You should get some rest. You've done all you can for now." Laura nodded slowly, though she didn't move. "I know," she said quietly. "But it's hard to stop thinking about everything." Daniel stepped closer, sitting down beside her. "It's okay to feel this way," he said gently. "We all do. But we can't let it break us. The patients need us to be strong." Laura glanced at him, surprised by his maturity. Daniel was young, barely out of training, but he had grown so much in such a short time. She smiled faintly. "You're right," she said. "Thank you, Daniel." In the engineering deck, Emily Dawson and Ryan Scott worked alongside Chief Engineer William Harper to assess the damage. The auxiliary power they had restored earlier was holding, but only barely. Sparks occasionally flew from damaged panels, and the hum of machinery was uneven, like the ship itself was struggling to breathe. "We'll need weeks to fix this properly," Harper muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Maybe months." Emily sighed, leaning against a console. Her red curls were tied back haphazardly, and her uniform was streaked with grease. "Do you think Earth will send reinforcements to guard us next time?" she asked. Harper shrugged. "Hard to say, but after what happened, they'd be fools not to." Ryan nodded, tightening a bolt on a nearby panel. "Whoever those attackers were, they weren't messing around. They wanted us dead." Emily shivered at the thought. "Why would anyone attack a hospital ship? It doesn't make sense." "No, it doesn't," Harper agreed. "But that's not our problem right now. Our job is to keep this ship running until we get home." On the bridge, Captain Robert Hayes stood beside Admiral Lucas Grant, studying the monitors. The fleet had formed a protective perimeter around the Solace, ensuring no further attacks could occur. Still, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The enemy ships had vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind more questions than answers. "Admiral," Hayes said, turning to Grant, "do we have any leads on who these attackers were?" Grant frowned, his sharp features etched with frustration. "Not yet. Intelligence teams are analyzing the data we collected during the battle, but so far, nothing matches anything in our databases. Whoever they are, they're using technology unlike anything we've seen before." Hayes clenched his fists briefly before relaxing them. "They attacked a neutral vessel. That's a violation of intergalactic law. If word gets out, it could spark a war." "It already has," Grant replied grimly. "Earth's leaders are calling for increased military presence along the borders. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." Hayes nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "And what about the Solace? What happens to us?" "You'll return to Earth for repairs and debriefing," Grant explained. "After that, it's up to command. But I suspect your mission will change. Hospital ships may no longer be considered safe." The news hit Hayes hard. The Solace had always been a symbol of hope and healing, a place where soldiers could find refuge, If even that wasn't safe anymore, what did that mean for humanity's future? Back in the mess hall, soldiers and engineers gathered around makeshift tables, sharing food and water rations. Conversations were quiet but filled with determination. They talked about home, about Earth, and about the lives they wanted to return to. For a brief moment, the fear and chaos faded, replaced by camaraderie and purpose. "I never thought I'd miss synthetic coffee," Ryan joked, taking a sip from a cup. "But here we are," Emily chuckled, shaking her head. "If this is what passes for coffee, I might just give it up altogether." Laughter rippled through the group, lightening the mood. Even Chief Harper cracked a rare smile. "Don't knock it," he said. "It's keeping us alive." As the hours passed, the crew began to settle into a rhythm. Medics tended to the last of the wounded, engineers secured critical systems, and soldiers ensured the ship was ready for the journey home. Though battered and bruised, the Solace had survived. And despite the losses they had suffered, the crew refused to let despair take hold. That evening, Captain Hayes called for a memorial service in the ship's chapel. The room was small, lit only by flickering candles and the soft glow of emergency lights. Crew members gathered quietly, their faces solemn as they paid their respects to the fallen. "We lost good people today," Hayes began, his voice steady, but tinged with emotion. "Men and women who gave everything to protect others. They were heroes, and they will never be forgotten." One by one, crew members stepped forward to share stories about those they had lost. Laura spoke about a young soldier whose courage had inspired her. Daniel talked about a nurse who had worked tirelessly until her final breath. Each story painted a picture of bravery and sacrifice, reminding everyone of the cost of survival. When the service ended, the crew filed out silently, their hearts heavy but full of resolve. They had mourned their losses, but now it was time to look ahead. Humanity had faced countless challenges throughout its history, and each time it had risen stronger than before. As the Solace drifted closer to Earth, guided by Admiral Grant's fleet, the crew allowed themselves to dream of home. They thought about families waiting for them, friends eager to hear their stories, and the simple comforts of a planet untouched by war. But they also knew that returning to Earth didn't mean the fight was over. Whatever threat had attacked them was still out there, lurking in the vastness of space. Captain Hayes stood by a viewport, gazing at the stars. The galaxy stretched endlessly before him, vast and mysterious. Somewhere out there, danger lurked, but so did hope. And as long as humanity refused to surrender, that hope would guide them forward. "We'll keep going," Hayes muttered to himself, his voice firm. "Because that's who we are."